The F1 2026 season is pretty much here. We can absolutely officially say it's race week, which is exciting. And I think it's fair to say a lot of neutrals in particular, this is an exciting season. The transition into the new rules and regulations for cars, I think might open up an avenue for this being one of the most competitive seasons, at least at the top end of the championship, if nothing else. I do have a gut feeling, though, it's going to really separate the big four from the rest of the field, which might suck a little bit. What happens at the top of the field is going to be, I think, extremely intriguing race to race, and seeing how these teams develop as the season goes on, and I guess who can find that sweet spot sooner rather than later. And the back markers, they could be pretty far behind, it seems. But look, let's get into predictions for the season ahead, because 'tis the season. When Lando Norris won the Drivers' Championship last year, I thought that might be rock bottom. From a fan perspective, I was like, there's probably no one I'd rather see lose than Lando Norris. However, this season could be that season, because Mercedes might be the real deal. And that scares me, because that means George Russell, I think, is very, very on for at least a competitive enough season where he's going to be in the mix for the Drivers' World title. If not the proverbial favorite within a couple of weeks' time, I think. Look, I can't stand the guy. He is quite literally the F1 Karen. I don't care. It's got nothing to do with just the drive to survive things. It's basically everything about him off track that seems to rub me the wrong way. And for me to be rooting for Lando to go back to back instead of having to deal with the George Russell World Championship speaks volumes, because I think we all know where I sit in the Lando Norris conversation. So that scares the living daylights out of me. But if we're being completely honest here, Mercedes look like they've delivered the real deal. The power unit on that car, I think, is well ahead of everybody else right now. And we can never look too much into preseason testing. But there is just something about the speed of that car that screams front runner for me. Obviously, I'd love to say Kimi Antonelli be the one competing. He's just still too young. Still far too young. It's still going to be a learning curve for him this season. That doesn't mean that they are not favourites for the constructors, because we'll get to that in a minute, but I think they are. There is a part of me that is clinging on to the hope that Ferrari have found something. Charles Leclerc going fastest, the final day of testing, the final lap, setting a marker. That is peak Ferrari, by the way. That is peak Ferrari. We are going to fill you with hope, only to break you down as this season goes on. So I can't wait to see how this one unfolds. But the revolutionary design, obviously, on the rear flap there is the main talking point. I still think that the power unit itself looks like it's going to be reliable. That is always an important tick for Ferrari. But it does seem like they may have unlocked something. So there's, like I said, there's genuine optimism that I think at the front of the grid, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, maybe Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and obviously the two McLaren drivers. It's very hard to definitively say which one is the one to beat. And I think the fact that all of those drivers going into this weekend's Melbourne Grand Prix, if you told me one of those five wins the race, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I'm not shocked by any stretch of the imagination. So if I have to hang my head on something, though, and I have to make my prediction for who's going to be the drivers' champion, I'm going to say George Russell. I just think I trust that Mercedes package a little bit more off of what we've seen, which is not very much at all. So that could flip very, very quickly. But if I have to pick someone today, that is the pick. And therefore, my Constructors' Championship winner will be Mercedes for that same reason, though I do think that we're going to see the best of the two Ferrari drivers. And I think that there's a very, very real world where we get a Ferrari's Constructors' Championship this season, if nothing else. And obviously, it's wild that we haven't really spoken on Max Verstappen and Red Bull, because if any driver on the grid is going to adapt to a new car quicker than everyone else, it's going to be Max Verstappen. He just has the mental bandwidth to handle whatever comes his way, and the learning processes, he can figure them out on the fly better than anyone. So you'd be stupid, I think, to rule him out entirely. We just don't know much about that Red Bull design, aside from the fact that the livery looks fantastic. So shout out to them for that. But we'll see how it all comes together from then. McLaren, I'm extremely skeptical about. I think both drivers, obviously, based off of last season's car, they're as good as anybody else in certain racecrafts. Are they the drivers that can adapt to these regulations faster than everyone else with a team who clearly invested all of their chips and energy into last season's car? I don't know. That's the big concern there. And I think we'll have obviously a clearer picture after the Australian Grand Prix this weekend of where they stand and just how competitive they are. But as of right now, I'm willing to go out and say that this is going to be a Mercedes versus Ferrari front row, at least for the first couple of Grand Prix. And then it becomes a development race. Then it becomes who learns quickest and who can implement what it is that they see fastest and best. So that makes a lot of intrigue. It's hard to pick a dark horse because I don't think there's going to be a dark horse. Like I said, I think the gap between the big four and the rest is huge. If I had to pick someone, I'm going to say Alpine, just because they absolutely pulled the plug last season and publicly stated that they were just going to turn all their attention to the 2026 development stage. So we'll see what that brings exactly. I have a lot of faith in Pierre Gasly as a driver. So if anyone is going to challenge those top four teams, I think it's Alpine and Pierre Gasly, but I don't say that with a lot of confidence at all. But we're excited for this weekend's Grand Prix, of course, as always. Keen to see exactly what this season brings forth. My fingers are crossed. My fingers are crossed that despite the concerns around the battery charge and how the deployment's going to look in a full race, we are going to get a more competitive field, if nothing else. And then we can build off of it from there.
You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.